Hello and welcome to the Blueness Guide, the ideal nutrition guide for humankind. Today, we're going to focus on vitamin D, one of the most important vitamins for the body. Pay close attention and don't miss a single bit of this podcast, because it's absolutely essential for a healthy diet. So, what's up with vitamin D? Vitamin D is one of the fat-soluble vitamins. In other words, it's a vitamin that's stored in the body's fat and liver. It gets released as needed. However, unlike the other vitamins in this group, vitamins A, E, and K, vitamin D is not supplied by dietary fats. Its main source is the sun. Vitamin D comes in two forms, D2 and D3. D2 is produced by plants, while D3 is mainly of animal origin, rarely from plants, or else synthesized in the skin, under the effect of ultraviolet rays. So, vitamin D, specifically D3, is mostly synthesized by the body after exposure to the sun's ultraviolet rays. Thus, 15 minutes of exposure 3 times a week, face, forearms, and hands, is enough to provide the body with 80% of the necessary vitamin D. That's all it takes to fully enjoy all the benefits this amazing vitamin brings. So there's no need to expose yourself any longer and risk health problems related to overexposure. Vitamin D is connected to many functions in the body. It plays a role in the absorption of calcium and phosphorus by the intestines, as well as in the reabsorption of calcium by the kidneys. It also contributes to the mineralization of bones and joints, as well as to muscle tone. As a result, it is essential for our bone health and may help prevent fractures and osteoporosis. On the other hand, vitamin D influences more than 200 genes. It is thought to play a role in DNA repair and could have a beneficial effect in several diseases such as diabetes, certain cancers, and even epilepsy. When it comes to the immune system, T lymphocytes responsible for killing bacteria and viruses must first find circulating vitamin D and bind it to a receptor in order to trigger their defense process. This applies to the flu, ENT infections, tuberculosis, and wounds or other scars that need to be treated. For example, you'll notice that the flu mainly occurs during the winter months, when vitamin D levels are at their lowest after the reserves built up during the sunny days have been depleted. When it comes to cancer, there are noticeably fewer cases of colorectal cancer in southern countries than in northern ones, and this is true across all continents. Moreover, several studies report that administering vitamin D to rodents inhibits colorectal carcinogenesis that is deliberately induced during tests. Several observational studies seem to indicate a significant decrease in certain cancers, including breast cancer, when vitamin D supplementation is used. Thus, the risk would be reduced by 50% with a supplementation of 4,000 international units per day, compared to a lower dose. A deficiency in vitamin D is associated with an increased risk of viral infection. Numerous epidemiological studies show an association between vitamin D deficiency and a higher frequency of certain autoimmune diseases. For example, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and scleroderma. However, this causal link has yet to be proven. A vitamin D deficiency would cause muscle weakness and pain. It would also be associated with a higher risk of breast cancer, as we've seen, but also cancers of the digestive tract and prostate. It would be associated with a higher risk of cardiovascular diseases. A low level of vitamin D also appears to be correlated with cognitive impairment in the elderly and could double the risk of schizophrenia. A vitamin D deficiency would also lead to mood disorders such as anxiety or depression, blood sugar imbalances since adequate vitamin D intake can improve insulin sensitivity, as well as hormonal imbalances and difficulty losing body fat. In summary, a vitamin D deficiency would be associated with increased mortality from all causes and a host of complications. As you already know, vitamin D is synthesized by the body under the effects of the sun's UV rays. As a result, there are many situations, many times of the year, and many people who, often without realizing it, suffer from vitamin D deficiency at least part of the year, if not all the time. The long-term consequences, when combined with other deficiencies and a more or less healthy lifestyle, can be dramatic. Here is a list of people who, due to their personal situation or health condition, are particularly at risk of vitamin D deficiency. First of all, elderly people, who are often not exposed to much sunlight and for whom vitamin D synthesis becomes increasingly difficult with age. There are also people with darker or black skin, although this claim is questioned by some scientists. There are people living at high altitudes. In winter, the UVB rays responsible for vitamin D synthesis are absorbed by the ozone layer. There are also people who cannot be exposed to the sun because of their illness, such as vitiligo. People who are overweight, because body fat traps vitamin D, which is stored in it and prevents it from circulating in the blood. There are breastfed children, for whom the mother must supplement with vitamin D, people suffering from bile duct obstruction, which leads to fat malabsorption, people with kidney failure, and people who are constantly protected from the sun in general due to their habits and behaviors, so living indoors, traveling by car, or wearing clothing that covers the entire body. In short, vitamin D is a key vitamin, whether you have a standard Western diet or not, because it helps prevent many diseases. The problem is that its intake depends on the sun. So how can you avoid being deficient, especially in winter or when you can't get sun exposure? In France, for example, 80% of French people are currently lacking in vitamin D. This number can go up to 91% in winter. In food, you can find vitamin D in cod liver oil, fatty fish like salmon, herring, anchovies, egg yolk, whole milk, butter, and non-skimmed dairy products. As you may have noticed, these are generally foods rich in fats, which are actually recommended as part of the blueness diet. However, the amounts provided by food are very insufficient. That's why only sun exposure or supplementation will be enough to meet your vitamin D needs. But how much do we actually need? For a long time, the French Health Authority recommended 200 international units of vitamin D3 per day to stay healthy, before raising this amount to 600. The French National Academy of Medicine recommends a daily intake of 800 to 1000 IU per day up to age 50, and even more beyond that, which is 5 times higher than what the French Health Authority used to recommend when it was 200. The intake recommended by the Canadian Ministry of Health is 600 international units per day from ages 9 to 70, then 800 international units per day after age 70, based on minimal sun exposure. So, there are different opinions out there, and it's hard for those who want to take charge of their health to make sense of it all. Emerging schools of nutrition, for their part, have conducted in-depth research and a detailed review of studies on the subject in order to highlight the real needs, which therefore involve supplementation. What is the ideal dosage of vitamin D according to these emerging studies? Although the studies cited are mainly observational studies showing a correlation between a low blood level of vitamin D and various events, and that this correlation is not scientifically sufficient to prove that the deficiency is the cause of these events, it nevertheless helps to highlight a body of evidence. As a simple precaution and intuitively, one can easily conclude that supplementing with vitamin D, especially during the winter months when sun exposure is rare, at worst does no harm and at best can protect us from a number of more or less serious illnesses. If official bodies recommend 800 international units per day, is it possible to go beyond these recommendations? Vitamin D specialists John Cannell and Bruce Hollis believe that we should always maintain levels between 55 and 70 nanograms per milliliter in the body. A formula has been developed. You would need about 75 international units per kilogram of body weight per day, so that's 75 IU times your body weight. This gives you the recommended vitamin D dosage in international units. For example, a healthy adult who weighs 75 kilograms should have about 75 international units times 75 kilograms, which comes out to 5,625 international units per day. That's already far from the official recommendations. However, the appropriate dose should be determined by biological test results and adjusted accordingly, since everyone is different and this should be discussed with a doctor. On this topic, some doctors prescribe single high-dose vitamin D capsules. That's actually a bad idea, even if it sounds good. The problem is that these capsules are overdosed. They don't limit the effects of daily vitamin D synthesis from sun exposure. If only as a precaution, or because studies have shown that taking high doses of vitamin D is counterproductive, it's better to opt for daily vitamin D supplementation during periods when the body has depleted its stores, for example from November to March. This applies to countries with a temperate climate. Vitamin D in drop form. This method, for its part, allows you to best match the needs of each individual, according to the formula mentioned earlier. This is the supplementation method praised by all proponents of so-called emerging nutrition, and it's a bit off the beaten path. Vitamin D drops come in two forms. Vitamin D3, derived from lanolin, is completely natural and of animal origin. It is produced from sheep's wool. And plant-based vitamin D3, which comes from lichen, is more expensive because it requires more labor. Although vitamin D in drop form is the most personalized format according to your weight, it's not necessarily the most convenient. You can then choose a capsule format to be taken daily. Make sure to choose a product made in France, because it will comply with French standards, and this could save you from a lot of unpleasant surprises. Knowing that for a 75-kilogram adult, the daily vitamin D requirement is about 5,621 international units, you could choose products dosed at around 2,000 international units per tablet and take between 2 and 3, depending on your health, the winter season, your weight, and so on. That's all for vitamin D. See you very soon in the Blueness Guide, the guide to the ideal diet for humankind.